Welcome to Athletes and Entrepreneurs of the Alumni Journey. I'm Rob Finkelstein, founder and CEO of Alumni Direct, where we've created a platform to help athletes and other alumni network and connect with each other and tap into various resources in health and finance and career. And this podcast, it's all about athletes transitioning out of sport. It's such a major issue today between mental health and financial literacy. And we interview former college and professional athletes, and we talk about their transition, their journey to successful business leadership and entrepreneurship. And the whole idea is to teach and inspire athletes there is, in fact, life after sports. So excited today to have John Fremont Smith. How you doing, John?
Doing great. No, thank you so much for having me, Rob.
It's my pleasure. So John played football at Boston University. Then when he was done, and he's got an interesting story they'll share with us, but when he's done, he got into the world of finance and ultimately today. And see, I had to look down here because of my, one of those moments here. Friends, wealth management. It's funny because we talked offline and it's like, okay, it's all about friends and that's wealth management. So now we got that set. But so he started that company. We'll hear more about that as well. So John, talk about playing sports growing up. How did that shape you leading up into college?
Wow. I mean, it's a great question because sports for me really saved my life, to be honest with you. I was the youngest of 9 kids. I had 5 older brothers that all played sports, 3 older sisters that all played sports. My dad played soccer at Trinity. His mother was a professional tennis player. She was top 10 in the country. She played at Wimbledon, played at the U.S. Open, #1 ranked in Pennsylvania. So my whole life was pretty much about sports. Even during family events, it was about ping pong and football in the backyard. But when I say it saved my life, whether it was a good day in sports or whether it was a bad day in sports, it always, made me feel like I was supposed to be there. I always knew when I strapped on the helmet or I tied up those cleats that I was meant to be on that field, on that court. I think when anybody, whether you're a musician, whether you're an artist, when you find that moment where you kind of understand that you know who you are, I think that's where sports really, on a daily basis, school was great and I loved education, but I could not wait for that bell to ring to run out there, be with all my buddies, and the competition level. Regardless of whether it's t-ball, whether it's high school, whether it's college, it makes no difference, right? You still get the jitters, you still get the butterflies, you still love what you do every time you strap up that helmet. Yeah, I mean, for me, we could go on, but sports literally for 25 years of my life was probably the most important thing. And now that I've got a 14 and 16-year-old, and I am on Wall Street and working in finance, and I do own Friends Wealth Management, which we're proud to say we just trademarked nationally, and we're going to be building out Friends offices around the country, Friends of Michigan, Friends of Ohio State, Friends of Tennessee, as we begin the journey around helping these athletes in the new world of NIL. But I'm in a beautiful situation in my career where I'm 50 years old and I've had 25 years of athletics. I was privileged to play, as you'd mentioned, on the Boston University undefeated Yankee Conference championship team in 1993, won the Lambert Cup, but I was a redshirt. And we can get into that story as to how I got to be there. But I looked up to guys that were Sports Illustrated All-Americans and gentlemen that went on to play for the New England Patriots. And even as we'll talk about the transition after sports, now are leaders in their own right. Some are chief of police, some are chief of the fire department, some are detectives, and others on Wall Street. I think that transition is important. So I look forward to having that conversation as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So did you have a dream of being a professional athlete? And if so, what sport?
I did. Yeah, no, I was the first kid to play Pop Warner at whatever it was, the age of 5, 6, whatever you could get on the field. I had 5 older brothers that all played football that I went to every game. And I looked forward to being them. So from the age I could walk, basically, being in the NFL was my dream. I was privileged to play under some pretty amazing coaches, Walter Norton Jr. out of Brookline and Coach Hobbs and Cawthorn. We just had some elite coaches in high school, went to a very large, reputable high school. Robert Kraft graduated from Brookline High School as well. And, the sports there is tradition as it is across the country. But I just think that having coaches and having CEOs to look up to, as a young kid and then as an adult has really helped mold me into the father that I am today and the boss that I hope to be and the mentor that I want to be to these athletes. So, looking forward to being a part of this whole NIL shift.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it's sports are so impactful. I mean, I think most of us have played some sport at some time. I was a runner in high school and college. Just I always talk about, and we'll get a little bit into the whole athlete skill set, the DNA of an athlete, and it being very similar across all sports, just based on leadership and all that other stuff. So let's talk about so when you got into school, when you went to school, when I went to school, things were a little bit different, obviously, but was there any type of education for athletes transitioning out of sport?
There really wasn't. I mean, we're talking about a different era as well. I mean,
Sure.
mental health really wasn't discussed. Those of us that are over the age of 40 or 50 understand that, getting a glass of water was a big deal back then, right? Like we had the old school coaches that told us to play through pain, suck it up, rub some dirt on that, right? So we were not coddled. And that's not a
Right.
judgment on the new generation. It's just our parents were parents that fought in the Korean War or the Vietnam War. And they were pretty hard nosed coaches. So, when it was time to transition out, I was blessed to have, some really good teachers that I looked up to at Boston University, some coaches that did help me, transition because I did get hurt, and we can talk about that as well.
Right.
I went through, some pretty amazing experiences as I was recruited to play for the University of Miami Hurricanes. I met with Coach Erickson, was welcomed to be on the field with them in 1992, 93 after they won the national championship, but broke my back, was paralyzed, lost feeling below my waist, a 10-hour open back surgery, had to come back from it. And I think that during those times, I leaned in on my parents on how to transition away from sports. And then
Sure.
I was able to come back. I think that to answer your question, there really is no um, group for athletes that I know of that they can really lean in on that conversation and admit that it's hard to transition and that they need the help. And being from a family of military, I know that when you come back from war, it can be very difficult to
Yeah.
transition and figure out getting a job. And I do think that there is similar, not to downplay one or the other, but there is a similar PTSD involved with regards
Yeah.
to having to give up your sports life and try to figure out who you're going to be after being the man or the woman for however long.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, that's something that I think you see a lot of, just from an athlete perspective. You identify yourself as the sport, or and then from a same thing from the military perspective. And I've said that before. It's, you obviously military is life and death, but still there are definitely similarities there. And I think it's important, the education talked about, yeah, at Alumni Direct, about working with our resource partners and kind of developing curriculum or additional curriculum to help schools, not only with their current athletes, but with their alumni athletes as well. Because I think, I always bring it up. I was talking to one guy. He's like, "Man, Rob, I really wish I would have had like a 6 week workshop or a mandatory class that talked about transition out of sport, because everybody's going to get to it at some point. Whether even if you're fortunate enough to be a professional athlete, you're still going to come on it, and it's just to have that there and in teaching what to do. I think is pretty important.
Yeah, and I've worked alongside some really amazing people on Wall Street that have come from the NFL, that have played professionally, whether it be baseball or hockey, and they've all admitted, regardless of how strong and how athletic you are, that mentally we're all challenged with these transitions because it's a new world, right? You got to figure
Yeah.
out where you're going and how you're going to get there, and like anything in life, it's only easier when you ask for help.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about networking and connecting, and especially the importance of doing it while you're still playing.
Yeah, so from my perspective, the last 25, 26 years working for some of the largest firms on Wall Street, I've really become an expert on LinkedIn. I've really become an expert on how to find your communities that you want to associate with. If you kind of feel like what direction you want to go in, why reinvent the wheel, right? Start
Yeah.
learning from people and start reaching out to people. And what I've learned in my experience is when you ask for help, people are really going to step up for you.
Yeah.
I think that one of the things, because I'm an alpha male, right? I love walking into a room and just trying to be myself, but also being in charge in most situations. Because if not me, then who, right? And I think that as we make that transition and try to figure out what the next steps are going to be in our life, that we need to ask for help, and athletes have some of the more difficult challenges for doing that.
The one thing that kind of resonated, I was talking to an agent, and he just said that what happens is a lot of times the athlete, they're so drilled and zoned into the sport, which is understandable, that they don't take the time to network and connect with people. And then when they're done, they're like, okay, where's my 6 figure job? And it's like, well, it might not be there because you didn't build those relationships. So it's really important. And we always stress, I even talk about it, even starting in high school. I mean, you're talking about your, having a son that plays high school football. Then, they've got their friends, the teammates, their parents, coaches. I mean, it's encouraged along the way. I was talking to a couple kids that one was a freshman and one was a sophomore, college athletes, and they said they wish they would have learned more about networking. I mean, obviously they're young, so they still have plenty of time, but still, it is important. So, and like you said, people are willing to help. I mean, I always bring up too where they say like, oh well, you've got this multimillionaire and I'm this young kid. How can I help? Well, maybe it's just they want to relive their glory days in sports, or maybe you can help out one of their kids. I mean, you just never know. And I think I always say if you have that kind of pay it forward mentality and willing to help others, other people want to help you too.
Yeah, and I think it sounds easy to say out loud, but when I transitioned, I ended up getting hurt my sophomore year at Boston University, and it was an 80% chance of being paralyzed for life. So I decided to make a choice on making sure that I was going to be able to be a dad and a husband, and I transitioned out of football and immediately transitioned into a fraternity. I think that while we're playing on a team, we get that camaraderie and that feeling of being in the locker room and being in the weight room, cheering for each other. I wasn't going to miss that. I refused to give that up. And what happens is, when I joined the fraternity, I made new friends and new brothers, and the transition was much easier as a relationship to who I was and how I felt about myself. But now that I've transitioned into finance, I was in Delta Tau Delta, which is a large fraternity nationally, and I bump into brothers that I've never met, but from around the country that were in Delta Tau Delta, and we immediately have something in common. We immediately want to help each other succeed, and I think whatever that fraternity is for you or sorority is for you, whether again if it's music, if it's painting, if it's math, I mean whatever that might be, find the people that get you excited to get out of bed in the morning, and just I think I listened to one of your earlier podcasts, Rob, and somebody basically had said surround yourself not with the people that are like you, but the people that you want to be
Yeah.
like. I think there's a lot to that. It's like don't dress for the job you have, dress for the job you want, which kind of is downplayed now after COVID, right? Nobody wears
Yeah.
ties anymore. But mentally, I think that there's something to that, right? You don't want to walk into the room and be the same person every day. I think Tony Robbins was a guy that I would recommend his new book, The Holy Grail of Investing. It's very easy to read, and it's talking about the transition that's taking place now on Wall Street from the public markets to the private markets, which I'm happy to talk about. But you know, the way that he talks about leaning in on finding the right people to surround yourself with, and then learning from them. One statement that he made in the book was, if you think back 6 months ago and you think to yourself, wow, I haven't really learned very much in the last 6 months, then you're not surrounded with the right people, right? Like every day must be a learning experience on every level. And when I think about who I was 6 months ago, when I was really diving into the NIL world, really understanding the NCAA versus the house, really understanding, Charlie Baker and his team and what their goals are for these athletes, and how the judge was going to rule on the history of NIL back to 2016, and what the rules are, which we can get into going forward with that $20.5 million cap, and becoming an expert on NIL. It took a lot of effort, and it took me surrounding myself with people like yourself, Rob, and having friends. We call our firm Friends Wealth Management for a reason. My mother, who raised 9 kids and 29 grandchildren and 15
Wow.
great grandchildren, Harriet Fremont Smith, who was an Irish redheaded firecracker from Boston, she used to say, listen, don't forget the friends you don't have yet. And don't forget the friends that you haven't met, because those people that you're going to meet are going to change your life in ways you can't even imagine. So even though we like to hold our friendships very tightly, don't forget the people you haven't met yet, because, and I believe God, puts those people into your life for a reason. And being that she was also an Irish redheaded, firecracker, she would immediately follow up and say, but we don't become friends with jerks, right? Just
Yeah.
don't put up with it.
Yeah.
And my dad used to say, when someone shows you who they are through their actions, don't second guess it. When somebody tells you that they're a jerk based on the way that they're acting or treating you, just remove them from your life. And I think that one of the things that most of us do is we like to hang on to our friendships, and whether it's people that we played football with or hockey with or baseball with, and some of them are great people to have in your life going forward. Some of them were meant to be friends just for that moment in time. And I've learned, you know, at this point in my life, I really try to surround myself with people that are better than me at everything, because, I can admit that I'm not the best at everything, but I
Right.
want to get better as a human being. And I think back to what Tony Robbins said, the last 6 months, I've really leaned in, and I look at myself 6 months ago and I feel like that guy was an idiot. He didn't know a lot, right? I hope to say the same thing about myself 6 months from today, but it's a learning process, and just making sure that your friends, which to us will be the athletes, to us will be hopefully the athletic departments, the universities, will be the families of the athletes. Friends Wealth Management was specifically created by athletes for athletes.
Right.
The entire foundation of our firm is for NIL. And we can get into the discussion around, investing, and we can get into the discussion around, who Friends Wealth Management is. But at the end of the day, Rob, like we talked about earlier, it really is just good people helping good people. And
Yeah.
once people realize our mission, and it really is a mission, this is not a sales pitch. I'm not trying to convince anybody to buy what we have. What I can tell you is the smartest people in the room that I look up to, that I respect, the inspirers of the world that manage, that have $65 billion under custody, they've decided to partner with us.
Yeah.
Ares, which is one of the top private equity firms in the world, they've decided to partner with us. Foley and Lardner, one of the best NIL law firms on planet Earth, and working with most of the professional sports teams, they decided to partner with us. Eisner and Amper is another team that we love to bring on soon. So it's not just Friends Wealth Management, it's not just John Fremont Smith. It's all of these people that have kids that play sports, all these people that used to play sports, their grandkids play sports. Most, if not all, come into a conversation with me extremely weary, because we both know the wild west of NIL for the past
Yeah.
5 years, the opaque deals, the backroom cash apps and PayPal taps, and kids that have NDAs. It was not, I was going to say it was a little dirty. No, it was dirty. It was a lot dirty. And I think that there was a lot of great intentions. I'm friends with some amazing human beings that were running collectives. And I don't say the word collective in a negative connotation, because I think that they did a lot of good. They really did. But
Right.
many of them were not financial advisors. These people, some of them were real estate agents, and some of them, sold cars for a living, but they ended up having enough money and enough clout, enough connections to be able to try to raise money for their school at a time where their university, based on the NCAA regulations, were not allowed to pay to play. So the collective stepped up. They did what they could for their teams. And I think that's admirable. But as we both know, there were definitely some bad actors, and there were definitely some kids that are getting taken advantage of with predatory deals. And it just got to the point where I had a decision to make after 25 years working for 10 of the largest firms on Wall Street. I've represented 3 billionaires. For those people that understand finance, I have a Series 6 license, a Series 7, a Series 63, a 65, life and health, long-term care. My 65 license makes me a fiduciary. And the word fiduciary gets thrown around a lot. I think Fisher Investments kind of is the one that throws it up on all these commercials, and we do better when you do better.
Yeah.
That's not how I look at it. Fiduciary to me means that when I wake up every day, I truly must do what is in the best interest of my clients, no matter what. I must always put my clients before me all the time. And being one of 9 kids, with 29 nephews and nieces, I was an older brother too. I think that's kind of common sense, right? Doing the right thing at all times. But NIL is not that. It historically has kind of been doing the bad thing or the wrong thing at all times. So I get the skepticism, and I understand why people are negative. I hear also, oh, well, you've got an NIL fund, which we'll talk about. Oh, well, there's a lot of people doing NIL funds. And
Right.
I just kind of smile and I say, that's great. But how many of them are a fiduciary? I lose my licensing. I lose my house. Quite frankly, I lose my life if I end up stepping across a line that exists, which
Right.
means that I must do what is in their best interest. So when we talk about the NIL marketplace in general, I think that the sun is finally coming out. We have a solution to the problem. It will be copied, but what my partners and I like to say is they're not us. Anybody else that steps into the marketplace didn't build this for the reasons we built it. They don't have the experiences that we have. And quite frankly, the strategies that we've built with Inspira as our custodian are revolutionary. They've never been seen before. So it's a unique time for people to begin investing in sport. We own the trademark, invest in the future of sport, from the locker room to the boardroom, athlete first and fiduciary always. Our mission is clear. We are here for the athletes. We're going to help them with branding and financial literacy and transitioning from sports into the real world. We look forward to mentoring the next generation of athletes and people like yourself, Rob, and the friends that you're introducing me to. And I don't pretend to know everything about the NIL world. I really appreciate friends like you that are stepping up and recognizing that this is not predatory. This is in the athlete's best interest.
Yeah, so you cover a lot there. We wanted to, we'll still cover a little more on it, but let's just real quick, some thoughts in a few words on the positives of NIL, and you kind of gone across some of the negatives, but just give your thoughts on both.
Yeah, so I like to think as the glass being half full, right?
Yeah,
I don't think that there's a lot of time in this world for the worries. God has a plan, and we just keep moving forward. And I think that with NIL, the first thing that I think about is mission critical for us is saving women's sports,
yeah,
saving the Olympic sports. I think that if you do your research, that one, the research that is out there may or may not be true because a lot of what's going on in the NIL world historically was through NDAs. So take everything with a grain of salt. But it's my opinion that the top 5% of athletes, let's say, averaging out, the top 5% of athletes have been getting big deals. But 95% of
yeah,
athletes really have been getting very small deals and don't really know how to step into the NIL world, don't really understand how to market themselves and how to get in front of these third parties. I would pound the table that because the $20.5 million cap that's happening with the NIL relationship at the universities and how they're able to pay their players, there's not going to be a lot of money left over for women's sports and Olympic sports. And but one thing that I find to be very positive, right? So we try to figure out, okay, how do we turn this into a glass being half full? There are new things called private scholarships. The unlimited scholarships will be available, and a picture that I can paint for you is, these are all hypothetical, but let's say
right,
Duke last year had 13 kids under scholarship, and they were playing with those 13 scholarship players. This year, Duke might have 20 kids on the team because rosters are able to go up. And they may have 7 players that are under a private scholarship from a community member, right? So, not a booster, not the university.
right,
Those fall under the new NCAA regulations, but I want to be reaching out to the women's sports communities. Who are their parents? Who are the people that care about their sport? And then allowing them to create, private scholarships for these ladies and putting, investment strategies together where not only are they donating money to a school, I think there's a key, discernment to make here. Historically, a donor gave money and they did get a tax write-off in some cases, but they gave money that they never saw again. They're donating it to the school in order to keep a program alive. What we're offering at Friends Wealth Management is a strategy where they can actually earn a return while investing in the future of sport, because 40 cents on every dollar in our fund does go to one of the largest private equity and private credit managers in the world, which is Ares. And for those of you that don't know Ares, it's spelled ARES. And I won't brag about all their top #1 credit manager in the world, #1 lender in the world other than banks. There's a lot to unpack as far as how great they are, but we're giving access to things that have never been allowed to be given access to the public markets before. And there's a lot of education that goes into it, but I do believe that NIL is going to figure itself out. I think that Friends Wealth Management and the FRNIL Fund is a solution to some of those problems, and we look forward to working with the universities to help them through this transition. But my fear is women in Olympic athletes.
yeah. And I just and hopefully, like you said, with like what you're doing, what some other people are doing, I think the positive I see with the NIL, when you kind of get away from all the other, obviously there's the money portion of it, but just it's creating an education for these athletes. It's creating how to become an entrepreneur, and learning what you need to do as far as paying taxes and setting up an LLC, and the branding and everything that goes along with the positive. And the negatives that I see, you talk about, a lot of it revolves around the big dollars and the portal and stuff like that. But I think there's a lot of good things going on with that. So I'm going to kind of switch gears now and get back into talk a little bit about alumni engagement. Obviously, that's something that's important to us at Alumni Direct.
Yeah.
So when you were at Boston University, maybe, and we'll kind of fast forward to today as well, were athletes coming back, and I don't mean just for like the golf tournament or the homecoming game, but like to mentor and work with the current athletes and maybe some of the alumni athletes?
So I'd like to say yes. I do think it was a different time, right? Normally, when
Yeah,
we had professional athletes coming back, it was like Micah Ruzioni who scored the game-winning goal for the
sure.
you know the for the United States Olympic team versus the Russians. It was just always you'd get the chills, and he'd come into the room, and it was more of a motivational speech, right? More trying to get you pumped up for the game, that kind of stuff. Our lives were just so crunched, and I get what it's like to wake up at 4:30 in the morning and go to a 5 o'clock practice, and then have to immediately go to school, and then immediately go to study hall, and then immediately sign in for every meal, and hit the weight room, and then go to practice and double sessions. And there wasn't really a lot in my mind at the moment. Again, I was a freshman and sophomore in college at that
Sure.
time, but there wasn't. I didn't see a handoff being done for the seniors. Now, the people that I played with, I could say that our generation did help change that. There's Paul Francisco, who went on to play for the Patriots and is now at State Street, and he's just an incredible human being. Mark Fossey and Anthony Primavera, and I could go on and on. These guys that I look up to, that as men went on to be successful and are now leaning back into that conversation, because I think we're at a time now where mental health is more discussed.
Yeah.
But our generation, I think, as I'd said, the Korean War vets and the Vietnam War vets were like, suck it up, right? So, but the
Yeah.
transition into Wall Street, I do think that there are communities out there in each type of job, right? Whatever you're looking for, the beautiful thing about playing sports is you're going to find other people at your jobs that have played sports, right? So as you're making that transition and you decide what industry you want to go into, I always said, listen, why would I aim low? I want to know who the top 5 firms are in my industry. I want to know who the top 5 CEOs are at those firms. I want to know if they played college football or if they played college hockey or baseball. And then I want to use that in a conversation with them, because I can tell you the very first interview I had, and you asked me earlier, how did I transition from, sports into finance? I had the opportunity to meet with the president of Fidelity Investments. FIS was Fidelity Institutional Services. His name was Kevin Kelly. And I'll never forget it. I was a kid, probably whatever it is, 20, 21 years old. And I walked into his office and I immediately looked up. And Kevin Kelly, who was the president of Fidelity at the time, was 6'9", I think. And the first thing I said to him, I'm holding a briefcase and I'm wearing a suit and I'm feeling like, I'm becoming an adult. The first thing that came out of my mouth was, "You must have played basketball." And he looked down at me, and the first thing he said to me was, "You must have played football." And I said, I was 6'3". At the time I was probably 270 pounds of muscle. And I said, "Yeah, I played for Boston University." And he immediately picked up the phone. He had only given me 15 minutes. I was going to meet with the president, right? He picks up the phone and he immediately called his assistant and he said, "I'm going to need an hour with this guy." And we sat down, and I won't never forget it. We talked about sports for the first half an hour. He played on the Olympic team for Canada, and it was just this camaraderie that took
Yeah.
the stress out of the room as far as me interviewing. And because I played football, because he played basketball, because I was brought up by great parents and I was well spoken and well educated, he gave me a shot when he transitioned me into the World Trade Center at Fidelity Investments in 1998. And you want to talk about alpha males and alpha females, when you're trading for Fidelity during the dot-com bubble leading up to the Y2K bug, and every decision that's being made is a big decision for yourself, for your firm, for your client. It can become pretty stressful, and you do lean back into those moments of double sessions when you're up in Maine, as Boston University would go up to Maine, and 105-degree weather, wearing full pads and working out in double sessions. And as Tom Brady said, football is hard, and it taught us how to get through moments in life, right? Like, people don't have to play football to find out how hard life can be. You find out in your own ways, but going through that adversity on the field has certainly helped me in the boardrooms. Having represented 3 billionaires, it gets pretty stressful, right? And
Yeah.
speaking in front of hundreds of people about finance and meeting with chief economists and portfolio managers and strategists and analysts, and it gets stressful. And I think that, the transition is much easier when you can find people who played sports, you can relate to those people. And, even the best people in the world get nervous, right? I must have given 1,000 speeches, but I still get those butterflies like we do,
Right.
before a big game. And any athlete that's out there, you can close your eyes and remember what it was like before kickoff in the locker room. There's kids throwing up. There's, kids that are, freaking out. Everybody gets nervous, even if you're the star athlete. And it's true in finance and it's true in every other industry. We're human. And I think that we need to fall back on our training, like a military, you fall back on your training when things go sideways. And I think that the training that we get through athleticism really does mentor the next generation of leaders. And when you can find other leaders that have gone through similar circumstances like yourself, and you can, build your own fraternity or team after you've graduated with, mentors that you can look up to. One of my first mentors was the chairman of the board at the Bank of New York Mellon, John Baum. And when I interviewed with him, he said, "Have you ever read the book Good to Great?" And I said, yeah, it's a great book, and he explained that his version of it was, getting the right people off the bus, right? Understanding who you don't want on your team, right? So letting go of some relationships in order to make everybody better, getting the right people on the bus and making sure that we're surrounding ourselves with good people, and then trusting that bus driver. And, in my case, it was John Baum, who played football for Bucknell, who understood what it was like to be in a locker room, who is now on Wall Street teaching the next generation of, finance, how it was going to be tough during 2008, corporate credit crisis. How are you going to talk to your clients? And we always went back to the locker room. So that's why we trademarked, our fund. We're taking investing from the locker room to the boardroom. And as we talk about helping athletes with their branding and helping athletes with their financial literacy, there's a statistic that blows my mind, but 78% of athletes go broke within 5 years of retirement. That number jumps to 85% for the NFL. So 85% of NFL athletes go broke after retirement. And what's even more mind blowing is 100% of them had a financial advisor. So,
Right.
in my question, being a fiduciary, how does that happen? Right? How did we allow that to happen? And one reason why I founded my firm was athlete first, fiduciary always. We're gonna stop that. People that want to work with us, that want to partner with our partners, that want to be introduced to people, and if it's not us and they're already working with a financial advisor, we work alongside their financial advisors. We work alongside their agents. It takes a village, and we're not trying to grab clients from anyone. If someone needs help, we'll figure it out together, kind of thing. But I think that right now, as NIL is coming out into the world in a new light, I think it's people like you, Rob, and hopefully people like me that will be able to, make this transition a much smoother transition for all athletes.
Yeah, I mean, and there's a lot to unpack there. What John just shared with us, I think when you look at a couple things that I always call them the nuggets that I take out. One is that as an athlete, people want to hire athletes, and he brought that up with his interview and how they related. So athletes out there, that becomes your resume. I've talked to some people where they say, oh, they've
Yep.
gone to career services. Career services said they don't really have much of a resume because they really haven't had the opportunity. But being the athlete is that resume. And so when that time does come to transition, people want to hire athletes and people look up to athletes. And I think that's important you know, to understand that. And, so when you're, worried about what's next and all that, just kind of remember like what John was saying, just the things they practice and played on the field and all those things just come into factor into real life. I think that's critical. So, um, maybe just kind of wrapping this up, any other, because you covered a lot as far as some of the things that you're doing in the NIL space, anything else you want to highlight of what you're doing, moving forward and helping athletes in this NIL space?
Yeah. So for those of you that are interested, right, and this again is not a sales pitch. This isn't us trying to do a cash grab. We're out here really trying to help the future of athletes, and however we can do that. When you're one of 9 kids, it's all about stepping up for each other.
Yeah.
What we've done is not only is our firm open to help with athletes in any way, but we've created in an investment vehicle which is going to be custodied through Inspira. And if you're not familiar with Inspira, they're a $65 billion custodian. We didn't have to have our vehicle, our fund, with a custodian. But because of the world of NIL and the opaque deals, and because we're fiduciaries, we want this strategy, which is the first revolutionary NIL fund in history. It is available to accredited investors. So, and you can look up online what that means, but accredited investors will be able to invest in this strategy. And we're opening up a door for people to invest in human beings, which has never really been done before. People invest in companies, but um, what we've created is not predatory. And for those people that do understand investing, we're looking to get a 2.5x return on our investments in these athletes based on the fact that we want to take second and third tier athletes and help them with NIL money. We want to take women athletes and the women's sports as well as Olympic athletes and help them with money. The way that I've structured this, so that I'll step forward with this first. It's not predatory because if they don't become a professional, if they don't earn money off of their athleticism within 5 years of graduation, we do leave it open for our investors to, get paid back on the investment that we'll be making for them. But if they don't end up working out, there's no clawback. There's no interest. There's no, we want our money back. We're in the business of helping athletes, and if it doesn't work out, then they keep the money. And some investors don't want to hear that, right? But as a fiduciary, I have to say, we're not going to get every agreement that we sign with these athletes correct. When I traded microcap stocks, you just got to get more of your decisions correct than you get wrong. And everybody makes a ton of money. But 40 cents on every dollar in our fund is being given to Ares, which we felt as a fiduciary. Ares is going to be running 30 cents into a secondary strategy, which is, you can Google it and go on ChatGPT and just look up Ares secondary strategy performance. It is very good, in my opinion. Their credit managers will be getting 10 cents on every dollar. And they literally, in the last 10 years, have raised more money than any other firm on planet Earth as it comes to credit. They're the number one lender in the world other than banks. So I think that having Ares on one side of the ledger for us, for our investors, not our donors, for our investors, we see that there's real potential for them to get a return on their investment from that 40%. And then 60 cents on every dollar in our fund. And for those of you that are listening, the fund is the FRNIL Fund, which could either be the Friends NIL Fund or the First Revolutionary NIL Fund. 60 cents on every dollar will be going into athletes. And we'll be meeting with athletes personally. But we've built a new system, which we like to call the new Bloomberg machine for the NIL marketplace. It is, AI generated, scrubbing the internet, understanding who these athletes are that we're considering investing in. But the athlete investment profile score, the AIP score, is how we're going to basically decide on where we go. We're going to jump on airplanes. Initially, we're launching our strategy in Florida because we've got a lot of contacts down in Miami and surrounding areas. And, we would like to lean in on the University of Miami because my story began there as well before I got hurt. And it's one of those situations where there are 400,000 plus athletes to invest in NCAA. There's a lot, right? So we're going to do this one at a time. We're going to use artificial intelligence to kind of narrow down what university, what sport, what person. But our 100-point system, I think Deloitte has a 12-point system as far as market valuation on how they're putting together their black box. They're not really telling us what they're doing behind the scenes. But our 100-point system will incorporate something called the Rudy score. That's 5% that's going towards the underdog. You remember the movie Rudy, right, from Notre Dame, right? The younger kids may not know that, but anybody over the age of probably 40 understands Rudy was, a gentleman that really did have to come up from nothing and just tried to make the team. We're leaning in on those second and third tier athletes that are not getting these deals. And that Rudy score means a lot to us. We've got a legacy score, which, if your parents also played for that school, you're going to get more points there. And because we know that if we're building a brand, the community matters. And if the community already exists, it's going to be easier to raise money for those kids and be able to get returns on our investments. And as we look at it, for those of you that are wondering, how's he doing this? I don't get it. We will take money. So let's say we give a kid $10,000, which is from our investors. We will set up an LLC. And this is going to be completely NCAA aligned. So the LLC, when a student athlete, and Rob, you know this, but when they take a check, they have the option of creating a business. And you can make tax write-offs on your LLC or your business that are associated to your business. So the first thing we're going to do is help these kids and athletes set up an LLC. The money will come directly from the custodian. It doesn't come from me. It comes from Inspira through Friends Wealth Management and will be given to these kids, but it will be given in that bank account, which is the LLC. So that NCAA will have full transparency on where the money came in and then what it was spent on. And we will be using these assets for things that are related to their sport. So if we get them a mental health coach that's outside of the school, a physical trainer outside of the school, if they are very good, but they're at a junior college or a second tier college and they don't have the money to fly around and meet all of the coaches, we can put money towards that and tax write off it in order to get them more exposure, in order to sign a bigger deal. And when this happens, we're going to help grow their brand. On every NIL deal that they sign, our investors will keep 25% of all of the NIL deals that we put together with them, 25%, but we wanted the athletes to feel like they were still winning as they're growing their brand. So they're going to keep 75% of every NIL deal that we help with, whether we help them with or they do on their own,
Right.
until we get 2.5x back on the return. So $10,000 we give them, we expect back $25,000, but the money's going to come from deals that we're going to help them and give them exposure to, introducing them to these third parties. And then once we hit 2.5x, the agreement ends, right? So there is no, we own this person or contract in perpetuity. There, some of these opaque deals was 20%, 30% of your contracts
Right.
forever. There's a big deal right now with an athlete just got over $300 million contract and somebody's taking a large portion of it because they had one of these opaque deals, right? So
Yeah.
we have an end date. And one of the things is athletes don't have to work with us, right? So they can say, well, I don't like that deal. That's fine. But at the end of the day, we've screened you out through our AIP score. If you get over 85, we've met with you. We've met your parents. We think you're a good person. We think that you're a reputable, football player, hockey player against the competition. And in many cases, we'll be investing in kids that, already have a professional contract. So, if we're dealing with hockey players coming out of high school that have already been signed and baseball players that have already been signed, it's not going to be that difficult to earn a return while helping these kids, mentoring these kids.
Right.
So it's a unique solution. We will be sending out white papers and putting, up our own websites. And right now, if you wanted to go to friendswealthmanagement.com or friendswm.com, both get you to my site. We specialize in alternative investments and we give access to some of the largest portfolio management teams on the private side. But at the end of the day, we built this in the film room. This fund wasn't built in Silicon Valley. It was built in the weight room. It was built on Wall Street and it was built by athletes for athletes. If people have questions, we are 100% transparent. It is unlike anything that has ever been done before in investing and in sports. We are at the crossroads of investments, of technology and sports. And we're going to have a lot of fun as we, try to lift up these athletes in the new world of NIL. And, I appreciate you, Rob, bringing me on and just shining a spotlight on what we're doing. And, there's so much more we could talk about, but, anybody that has any questions, just know that, I'm an open book, fairly easy to talk to. And from a human perspective, I've lost two of my brothers to cancer. I lost my nephew to cancer. I lost my my father to cancer. I lost my mother to Alzheimer's. This is our moment to do something right. I just turned 50 years old and I've got about 20 years, hopefully, before I retire. If been in sports for 25 years and I've been in finance for 25 years and I'm able to create a company that allows me to do both, which is
That's
what I
great.
love, right? Do what you love and you never work a day in your life, right? Well, I wake up every single day thinking about athletes, thinking about how we can help them. And then, Aries, which again is one of the top investment management firms on planet Earth, is getting 40 cents on the dollar. I'm letting them handle the heavy lifting as it relates to trying to get our investors a return from a financial perspective. And my team is really leaning in on the first people in history. We're pioneering the NIL sector, which is the first public, offering a Reg 506C NIL fund. And there's a lot to unpack and a lot of details. But again, any questions anybody has, we have the answers. And, we're the first to do this. So if it feels a little strange from, oh, well, it sounds good, but it's got too many moving parts and I don't get it. All I can tell you is the largest firms in the world that we've met with that have the largest law teams in the world, all of them have stepped up to be alongside of, again, the Harmoniouses, the Foleys, the Inspiras, the Eisner and Ampers. These are people that have been doing this for collectively hundreds of years, and they all see that the fund that we've created at Friends Wealth Management is the solution to the NIL problem. And we look forward to working with the NCAA and helping them, as we transition all of us into this new world of NIL.
This has been great. And as John said, reach out on their website. You can find us at alumnidirect.com. If you go to our YouTube channel, is where you'll find the Athletes Entrepreneurs Alumni Journey. We're across all the different podcast networks, Spotify and Apple. But I encourage people, and I was talking about this to John earlier, is that we want to make an impact. I always say at least one athlete, but a lot of athletes. Transitioning out of sport is a major issue, and we really want to help out. So we encourage people to listen and follow Athletes Entrepreneurs Alumni Journey. John, thanks again so much. It's been great.
Yeah, Rob, and I appreciate the exposure on this historic time, right? We're within a week or so of NIL going live after that June 6th ruling. And, the fact that you brought me on with the first revolutionary NIL fund in history, I'd just like to close by saying, most firms sell products. We build futures. We're here to help, and any way that we can help, just feel free to reach out with an email or a phone call, and friendswealthmanagement.com. And I'll look forward to talking to all of your listeners and seeing how we can help.
Sounds great. Thanks again, John.